Welcome back to part 4 of our breakdown here of the Simplified Yang Standardized 88 Taiji long form. We have finally gotten to the end of Grasp Sparrow's Tail, and we are entering and doing single whip today. So, given our typical format, we will take a look at the form out on the floor, talk about it very briefly, come back here and rip it apart externally as well as internally, what we should be, where our hands and feet should be going, as well as what we should be thinking about and feeling inside of our bodies in order to express the move properly and effectively. So let's go out to the floor first. So we've just finished push. And we will begin shift, open the back foot just enough into cloud hands. Left hand comes up, right hand comes down. Shift back to the right foot, turn, finish cloud hands, bring the foot in, pluck. Left hand comes up with the foot, step it out, turn, and settle into single whip. Notice back hand is relatively high, front hand is pretty much right off the face, feet in the right position, nice and relaxed. Single whip. As we do single whip, we want to remember the whole body's moving pretty much the whole time. Whole body's moving. Whole body's moving. Pluck. Finish. And we're back. Single whip is not a very complicated move, but it seems like it at first. I think you can say that for most Taiji moves, actually. In this case, you have single whip, you have all of these different pieces moving pretty much the whole time until it all finishes and settles and stops like a clock. But don't get too disoriented by the fact the hands are moving in one direction and then they stop and the hands and the feet are moving, and don't worry too much about that. We want to think smaller. We want to pull our attention away from the hands, which are incidental, to the coordination of our core and our abdomen, which are essential to the moves. I want to draw this distinction because if you have been practicing Taiji or have seen Taiji a lot over your life, you will recognize that one person, you may have 2 people in the room or 10 people in the same room who all claim that they all do the same style of Tai Chi. Some of them may have even learned under the same instructors. And for the sake of argument, we'll just say that all 10 of these people are recognized masters to some degree or other. Now, they're not just sort of entry-level students who may be getting some pretty obvious mistakes going on in their form and their understanding. But then you can get them up on stage and you can watch them do their routines, say Yang 24, something simple, something everybody kind of knows. And you recognize pretty quickly that none of these guys look the same. All of their Taiji is different, sometimes drastically different, sometimes just subtly different. But you can tell they're all different, and it's not just because of some ambiguous style that's been attached to how they do their movements. This is because the external aspect of Taiji, the form that you're doing, is incidental to what is going on internally. Incidental. That means that it is derived from, but is not expressly required. It is not a requirement of the internal element. The internal element is what is important, is what is should be the primary focus for any Taiji practitioner. The form is a means of presenting the internal components, which is why I say that you should have an in-person instructor to help you along this route. Just doing it online without somebody who's there to actually explain things to you or really just to take questions from you on person, that's very difficult to do. So, this being said, the external component of single whip you will see we finish out of push, we then bring our weight back, and our hands begin to drop and lift. Left lifts, right drops, turn, classic cloud hands. Switch, same thing. Cloud hands are pretty cool. We'll spend more time talking about cloud hands specifically when we get to cloud hands later on down the line. In this case, we really just want to think of this as a transitionary move in the sense that we are pulling one hand up and dropping the other hand and turning in order to bring our feet into proper alignment, and then shifting back into the right foot to begin our pluck. Now, as with ward off, roll back, press, push, as with grass sparrow's tail, in other words, we want to look at go back to our 13 principles of Taiji. Well, we've already discussed the top 4. We've spent a little bit of time talking about the top 4. We'll probably spend much more time talking about those in a completely separate project that I have yet to begin shooting. So let's look at the next 4. We've got pluck. We've got, in this case, you can see pretty much all 4 of them in this move, but we're only going to look at, I think, maybe just 2 for now. The obvious one being pluck. In Taiji, we don't tend to grab a whole lot. You can in application. There's nothing wrong with that. There are reasons not to do it. There are also sometimes reasons to do it. I mean, part of Taiji martial theory does involve pressure, cavity press, toi na, which isn't the same as a grab, but it's similar. And certainly Taiji martial theory does also include joint locks and china, seizing and adhering, which generally speaking does require you to grab. So when we grab, we want to grab the right way. And as we'll get into with pushing hands applications much later, your own instructor can fill you in on any of this. There are times to grab and there are times not to grab, but that's largely situational. I mean, there's a principle behind it, but we're not going to get that here. In this case, we're just looking at pluck. In single whip, the pluck looks like this. You can bring them all together if you want to. I'm not concerned about what shape your hand looks like as long as you're not doing the teacup. Because this is called, we're looking at pluck. In single whip, this is our pluck. It's raised, elevated, and off to the side. We can look at applications for single whip some other day. There are different variations for how to make this pluck happen. As we demonstrated just a couple of minutes ago, I do the very simplistic, very simple, come across, one, pluck, as we continue. You can see sometimes a coil to get the pluck. That's fine. That's a slightly different, more complicated motion that I'm not going to go over right now. For right now, I want to just look at the pluck as you would do a pluck in single whip or in some other capacity. How would you properly do a grab? Taiji, we don't usually think with our hands. Very rarely. In fact, according to some, never. But you still want to be able to transmit tension the right way, all the way into and through the fingertips when necessary. And this is going to be important when we look at, not that I expect to ever get there, but if we ever look at cavity press and pressure point manipulation. When we do something that involves a pluck or a grab, we want to make sure that we are activating as few muscles as the fewest necessary muscles as we can. In other words, when we grab, we don't want to grab such that we're tensing up our entire arm to do so, even though that's exactly what grabbing does. I want to think more of plucking, like so, where we're sort of reaching into or around a space that we're grabbing. And generally speaking, pluck is going to entail primarily these 3 fingers, and these 2 are along for the ride, which is why sometimes people end up with a nice piece of popcorn here. So we don't want to leave our fingers hanging out right there. They're all together in some form and coming into this posture. But these are our main pluckers, just like if you did three-finger banjo, same idea. Although, well, same fingers at least. So when we're grabbing, when we're plucking, often that pluck is going to be just enough in order to get what we need. We don't want to grab too much, like we're not doing eagle claw here, right? We're just getting just enough that we need in order to get the tension to respond favorably for us, the other person's tension. In the case of single whip, that pluck means the simplistic version, we come around, rotate out, and now we think of reaching and stretching into that position. 1. This reaching and stretching, you can see, is like this. You can see also that's what's prompting this hand to lift. That's why both pieces are moving at the same time. I'm reaching, 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 stretching, grasping, but not tight, just to where I have to be, and that's what has prompted this hand to lift and to turn. This reach is still continuing because this reach and this stretch is prompting this turn here for me to follow through with my left hand. Which brings us to the second of the 4 principles we want to look at today, which is splitting. Now, this is more conceptual than it is external. It is an external manifestation. Splitting often refers to, or usually refers to, 2 hands moving past each other. So in Yang style, splitting will be found in moves such as part the horse's mane is the obvious one. Can find it also in, well, that's the obvious one. However, conceptually speaking, splitting, we'll deal more with splitting when we get to part horse's mane, which in the long form is actually quite a ways away. But conceptually, much like how press is taking the 2 halves of the body and then putting them against each other such that you're generating compression, splitting is the same idea. You're taking 2 sides of the body and now you are sort of pulling them apart from each other in order to generate the opposite of compression, whatever you want to call that. Not necessarily explosive, but decompression. No, that doesn't work either. But some sort of rending, some sort of splitting motion where you're, just like you have a stick and you're squeezing it like this until it just frays and snaps apart. Kind of like that. In this case, that split will be found in single whip because we have here, we are compressed as we are stretching, we're under some compression, and then as we turn and we expand, we have this pulling apart. Usually it's up and down. In this case, it's outward, but we don't want to pull apart such that we break this. This coming back too much. You're losing the bow in your back, you're losing the shoulder cohesiveness and connectivity. We don't want to go that far. We just want to go to full expansion to here. So that's why we have a slight open and settle as we finish. This is true in other styles of Taiji when they do single whip as well, but we're focusing on the Yang presently. One last piece for single whip that we want to look at too is we've got our pluck, we've got our turn and rotate. The intermediate, the place between those points, as we get our pluck and we begin to lift our foot as our hand lifts to step out. As before, when we are taking our steps, we want to make sure that we are pulling in through the core to pull the foot up. That pulling in is also prompting us to compress the front of our core, the front of our abdomen, which allows us to expand our back to push our hand up and then reverse that process after we've stepped to come into place. This pattern of stepping is going to be in pretty much every move in the form, so get used to it here. You see it also at the beginning as we step out, right? But this is a bit more obvious because we are lifting our hand slightly above our face to come around while we are pulling the leg in order to rotate it around and then step out again to take our step. There's one helpful rule of thumb when it comes to stepping in Tai Chi. Always assume that you should be able to turn any step into a kick as necessary. Now, we don't practice that way, but if you practice it with that in mind, you will find that you will start to load your joints and load your hips in a way that is more conducive to proper and more controlled stepping as a result. Think, at any moment, if I decide I come here and I want to turn this into a kick, well, now I'm going to load it like so, and I can press out with the kick. But I don't have to. I can just do it like a regular step. Play around with that in your own practice. So this brings us to the end of part 5 of our little look at Simplified Yang 88 long form. I want to stress the importance between the external expression of the moves and their internal essential natures. So to sum that up in case it wasn't super clear earlier in this piece, when we're talking about the incidental aspects of external motion, remember that although the form is standardized, the moves should look a certain way, they should be recognizable in a certain fashion, that's only because we're using the form to teach the internal components that you can't totally see. You can feel them on people, but you can't really see them. And even when you feel them, you don't always know what you're feeling until perhaps it's too late to do anything about it. That's sort of the whole point to Taiji martial theory. So when we are doing the form, we should always remember that at the beginning, the most beginning level, you are learning the form to do it just like your instructor looks like. You want it to look the exact same way. As you do that, as you gain deeper understanding of the movements, and as you are being coached to focus on the internal components of those movements, you will find that your body's a little bit different than the instructor's. So you don't have to make quite as large of a movement in one place versus another in order to reach the same conclusion, in order to express the same internal concept that the move is trying to present. And that's where you end up with these differences in personal styles between various masters of the craft. Remember, these different stylistic differences, they're not arbitrary. They shouldn't be arbitrary. They shouldn't be presenting things differently just for the novelty of a different looking form. There should be, in most cases, a difference that is essential in the sense that they are presenting an internal concept in a way best optimized for their understanding of that concept and their frame, size, mass, weight, reach, that kind of thing. And as always, everybody has a slightly different understanding of different concepts, but that doesn't mean that the concepts themselves are invalid in some fashion. As always, I encourage you to train under a real person, real flesh and blood instructor at a real studio, such as ours right here in bucolic Glen Burnie, Maryland. So if you have never done Tai Chi before, I hope this has prompted you to perhaps go and find an instructor and take a look and explore the wide range and world of the deep world of Tai Chi instruction. If you have been doing this for a little while, then I hope it has if nothing else, at least entertained you, but hopefully enriched some element of your training already. And if you're already a master, then I don't know why you're watching this, because I'm not going to be saying anything that you don't already know, I hope. So if you've been here this entire time and you've listened to all this, we thank you again for listening and watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.